welcoming in to now former Special Forces Green Beret Frank Larose. Thank you so much for your service and for joining me tonight.
Great to be here, Stacey. Looking forward to the conversation.
I am too. I am so, I mean, your expertise here is so needed. There's so much going on in the Middle East. And especially now that we've seen in Jordan, they launched that attack on our US service members, a drone that we couldn't tell if it was our own or not. We lost 3 people. And now we have the Biden administration joining with UK and striking those areas. They've killed a number of people. They've made some announcements and the airstrikes are ongoing. What do you make of this?
Well, first of all, there have been well over 100 strikes on American interests and American bases in just the last few months. But the one thing they all have in common is that they are done with the blessing of Iran. Iran is responsible for literally everything that's going wrong in that region right now, whether it's the Hamas attack that occurred on October 7th that killed more Jews in one day than any day since the Holocaust, or whether it's ongoing attacks from Hezbollah out of Lebanon into northern Israel, or whether it is the Houthi rebels out of Yemen that are attacking shipping in the Red Sea and that passageway that leads up to the Suez Canal. All of this is happening with Iran's backing. And this administration has been so weak on Iran that they bear a lot of the responsibility of this. Over $100 billion in oil revenue that's been allowed to flow, taking the Houthi rebels off of the terrorist watch list. We have to return to that maximum pressure campaign that President Trump had underway, because Iran needs to know if they continue to harm Americans and our allies, there will be consequences for it.
And so the consequences that they're currently exacting are a good first step, I would say, but they pre-announced that they were going to be making these strikes. So I saw that they'd killed one of our major terror targets, and that's great. I mean, it's always good to see them take out someone who's killing Americans, but on the larger scheme of things, how effective do you think this is going to be if they pre-announce every time they're planning on going in?
Well, I question that as a tactic. They may have had some reason for wanting to do it, but compare that to the strike that occurred during the Trump administration when Qasem Soleimani was, thank God, wiped off the face of the earth. Here's a guy that had been responsible for the death of many Americans, including some very dear friends of mine. Iran is this, massive exporter of terror, and if you're going to strike them, you've got to strike them where it hurts. You've got to strike them in things that they really care about. I hope I'm not holding my breath, but I hope that the Biden administration is working with our courageous men and women in the U.S. military to do just that. But again, telegraphing their punches doesn't give me a lot of hope.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things that you're talking about when you mention the telegraphing, it's something that you don't have to be a former military person to understand how silly that is. So if you're elected, because I know you're running, if you're elected, what do you plan to do about the military spending that we're doing in Ukraine? And I know Israel is also discussed. They're not similar situations, in my opinion. I think the Ukraine, we have less geopolitical interest there than we do in the Middle East with Israel, but they are spoken of in the same breath that we're funding them both. What are your thoughts?
You know, the old Reagan doctrine was peace through strength, and the best way to avoid conflict is to have a very capable U.S. defense apparatus. I worry that in too many ways we don't right now. Now, I still serve as a reservist in the military, but I worry about the lack of recruiting that we're seeing, and really some of the rhetoric that I'm seeing out on the campaign trail, even from one of my opponents in this Republican primary, where he said, Mr. Moreno, for example, said that Israel doesn't need America's help. I think that's a foolish idea. Or that he wants to just wave the white flag of surrender in Ukraine. Well, that's not the solution there either. Listen, you can end any war by surrendering, but surrendering to Vladimir Putin is not a good idea. There are things that we can be doing to bring those kind of conflicts to a swift end. I'm not very hopeful that the Biden administration is going to do those things. But I think when President Trump is back in the White House, when we have a courageous commander in chief that's willing to return to that policy where our enemies feared us and our allies respected us, well, he'll have a great ally in me in the United States Senate, working to strengthen the U.S. military, to have their backs, to make sure they've got the resources that they need to fight and win our wars.
And so fighting and winning wars is the actual purpose of our US military. It's support, defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And of course, winning wars. And so we have the withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's still fresh in the memories of a lot of Americans, especially the loss of 13 troops there. And so now we've seen three more troops needlessly lost. They weren't actually in the field of battle. They were struck in a position where maybe they shouldn't have even been. There's a lot of debate over that. What would you like to see with our strategic assets in the region? Would you make changes? Would you like something different there?
Well, it was right there in the question, strategic. Are they in our strategic interests? Are we actually working to accomplish a goal that furthers American national interest? And are we focusing on the right things? As you said, the military exists to fight and win our wars. It's tough, dirty, sometimes business. Focusing on some of these kind of woke ideology things that I've seen start to creep into the thinking of some of our leaders is really problematic, though. We need to stay focused on how we fight and win our wars. Again, China's built the world's largest Navy. The U.S. Navy has hired a drag queen recruiter, and we're falling behind. We need to focus on American industrial capacity as well to make sure that we're able to be that arsenal of democracy that we had been in the last century, so that when our allies need support, we're able to actually provide it. Those are some of the things that I want to focus on, but it all has to start with what is the strategic goal that we're trying to accomplish.
So if our troops don't actually think that there's a strategic goal or objective, and studies have actually they've actually done polling of our troops actually don't believe that in the Middle East, specifically speaking about the Middle East, that we have a strategic goal or objective that is quantifiable. If the actual service members don't believe we have that in mind, then how do we, I mean, they're the ones actually executing the mission. They're the ones who are getting the mission briefings. They're the closest to the actual issue, and they don't believe we have in the Middle East a strategic goal or objective that is attainable. How do we get from there to where we want to go?
Well, I'll tell you what, leadership begins at the top. The buck stops there. There's only one commander in chief. I can tell you that our fighting men and women can meet with and defeat our enemies on the battlefield if they're given a clear mission, if they're given a clear objective. We will fight and we will win. But when there's ambiguity from the top, when there's not that clear and defined mission, then there are going to be problems. And again, I think it starts with replacing the person in that position. That's why I'm a proud supporter of Donald Trump, and why I'll be a great ally of him in the U.S. Senate as well, so that we can stay focused on the things that matter, such as defending our country. And let's start with the U.S. Mexican border, where there's a massive invasion. And what's been offered is this deal that really just codifies illegal immigration. Says, oh, yeah, we're just going to let 5,000 a day come across the border. That's a non starter as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I think you've articulated it well, and people can find out more at franklarose.com. Thank you so much, Frank, for coming on the show tonight. God bless.